Sometimes the largest houses have the saddest hearts. The house on Willow Hill had been there for generations, its high iron gates and ivy covered walls drawing long shadows over the still town below. Few people saw anyone arrive or depart. The lawn was manicured, the windows clean, but behind those gleaming walls dwelled a man whose life had carefully disentangled in silence. Graham Whitemore had everything. Once, a self-made millionaire with charisma, vision, and the kind of luck people wrote novels about. But as the years went by, people who knew the young him forgot the man he grew into. Somewhere along the way, after loss, betrayal, and a silence that lasted too long, he closed off to everyone. Now, they referred to him as cold, distant, some bitter. Others simply felt sorry for him. But nobody dared knock on his door. Nobody, that is, except one. She didn't ride in a sleek car, weren't polished shoes on her feet, nor a briefcase in her hand. She wasn't a reporter or a fundraiser or someone with an agenda. She was a braided little girl with shoes that didn't fit quite right, and she carried nothing but a quiet determination that something was broken, and perhaps, just perhaps, that she could repair it. But what might a child know of heartbreak? How could someone so small reach a man whose pain had calcified into routine, who had built entire fortresses to keep the world out? Could her presence really stir something long buried? That's the thing about healing. It doesn't always announce itself. It doesn't ask permission. Sometimes it arrives soft as a whisper, at a time when we've long stopped hoping to hear anything at all. And in a world that instructs us to suit up to get on with it, to keep ourselves safe, to grin through the pain, what do we do when someone arrives, not to exploit, not to repair in the manner of grown-ups, but to sit alongside us in silence? Do we risk allowing them inside? Do we even recall how? It's not a story about miracles or snap changes or fairy tale endings. It's a story about gradual changes, unlikely relationships, and the way one person can start to open a heart sealed by years of grief. It's a story about a man who had closed all the doors in his life until a little girl appeared at his gate and said something that made the world stop. And it's about what came next. If you've ever borne pain so quietly that it became part of your daily rhythm, it's a story. If you've ever forgotten the way it feels to be truly seen, if you've ever questioned if people really do come back from the edge, then this novel is for you. Because sometimes healing doesn't come in the form that we hope, but it still gets through to us. Everybody in town knew the house on Willow Hill. It loomed like a stone giant behind wrought iron fences and trimmed shrubs above the quiet streets below. Its windows were always black, the curtains always closed, no Christmas lights, no summer laughter, only cold, still quiet. And inside was a man who had not said hello to most of his neighbors in more than a decade, Graham Whitemore. Others had once looked up to him. Some still did. He was an independent millionaire, had nothing, began with one desk and a rotary phone in the rear of a rented office, and constructed an empire that spanned state boundaries. Office skyscrapers carried his name. Television stations quoted him. Magazines had once dubbed him the golden touch of Wall Street, but Graham was not golden anymore, and good luck getting anyone in town to say anything about him. Kit goodbyes, sidelong looks good enough, maybe a shrug. Mostly, people just whispered. That man's got no heart. He's wealthy, but he exists like a specter. He used to smile. Before all of it collapsed. Fact of the matter, nobody quite knew what had gone on behind those walls. But like every small town, people had ideas. Some said he lost his wife to a long illness and never recovered. Others said his only son left home after a bitter argument and never came back. There were whispers of broken family dinners, hospital nights, unanswered calls, and years of silence. But one thing was for sure, Graham Whitemore had shut the world out. His estate employed staff, but not a single one resided on the property. Packages were left at the front door. Mail was taken care of by a service. Even his groceries were ordered on the computer and left at the side door. He didn't go to church anymore, didn't go to town meetings. When his name was mentioned in conversation, it was accompanied by a sigh. People lost patience with him. And to be honest, Graham had lost hope too. He spent his days in the same way. Wake, read the newspaper, gaze at a wall at breakfast, pace about his vacant garden because his doctor informed him sunlight was necessary, then back home to attend to his investments, although he no longer required additional funds. His house walls were covered with costly artwork and quiet rooms. And if you had really asked him what he felt, he'd probably tell you nothing. Not pain, not anger, just numb. But all of that began to change on a day that started just like the rest. It was late spring. The breeze carried a faint scent of pine and hot pavement. Graham sat rigidly on the garden bench beside the roses, arms crossed, frown seared deep across his face like it had moved in permanently. He wasn't supposed to have visitors. He never did. And yet, peripherally, he saw a small figure waiting beside the front gate. He initially thought it was one of the neighborhood kids, perhaps lost or out playing some game. He scrunched up his face. It wasn't one of the neighborhood kids. It was a small black girl, standing up straight with her hands clasped behind her back, chin held up slightly like she was expecting something. She had on a yellow tattered dress with a small pink flower on the collar and 2 sizes too large old sandals. Her braids were worn with purple ribbons, one of which was coming undone in the wind. Graham hunched forward, perplexed. "Hello," he shouted, voice dry from not being used. The girl didn't blink. She stared him straight in the face from behind the bars of the fence and said, plain as day, "I can mend your heart." He blinked. "What?" She smiled again. Not the goofy kind children sometimes do, but a firm, soft one. "Your heart, it's broken. I can mend it." Graham scowled, wondering if he'd misheard. "Are you seeking someone?" She rattled her head. "No, sir. I came for you." He actually made a noise, a brief laugh of surprise. The first one in years, but it wasn't a nice one. It was the kind of laugh that arose because of incredulity, as if she'd made a joke that was meaningless. "You don't even know me," he said. "I know you're unhappy," she said quietly. "My grandmama says some people carry unhappiness so long, they forget it weighs them down. But I can see it on your face." Graham was taken aback. Nobody had ever spoken to him like that before. Not with candor, not with compassion, not without agenda. "Who sent you?" he inquired. "No one. I happened to be passing by. I saw you. I knew." He felt something move, something uneasy. He stood up straighter, attempted to wave her off like a fly. "Okay, little girl, that's enough now. Go on home. This isn't a place to play." She didn't budge. "My name's Leela," she told him, "and I'll be here tomorrow, just in case you change your mind." And then without another word, she turned and skipped off down the sidewalk, purple ribbon streaming in the wind. Graham stood there, lips half parted, as she walked away. He reminded himself that it was ridiculous, a kid's imagination. Nonsense. But that evening, as he sat in his same chair, gazing at the same wall he always gazed at, he couldn't help but think about the girl with the ribbon and the huge sandals, and the words, "I can fix your heart." He reminded himself that he wouldn't expect her to return. But the following afternoon, there he was by the window nonetheless, just in case. It began on a Wednesday. Not that the day itself was anything out of the ordinary. Graham Whitemore no longer believed in special days. Each morning to him felt like the previous one. The same breakfast in silence. The same empty rooms in silence. The same garden he never actually noticed. Just routine, existing, not living. But his doctor had been adamant in their last appointment. "You require sunlight, Mr. Whitemore. You stay in that house too long, you'll forget you're alive." And there he was reluctantly sitting on a rusty old iron bench under a maple tree, his great woolen coat buttoned to the throat despite the warmth of the spring wind. A newspaper lay beside him, unopened. A tea had cooled in front of him. He wasn't seeking companionship. He wasn't even seeking conversation. But then he saw her, standing there on the other side of his gate like she was a character in the story and he'd lost the first chapter. She couldn't have been more than 7. Thin arms, dusty knees, and a shiny second-hand dress with small white daisies along the hem. Her sandals were obviously a couple of sizes too large, torn loose at the heel and slapping just a little bit as she moved from foot to foot. But what Graham saw most weren't her attire or even her small stature. It was her eyes. Big, dark, and inquisitive, like they looked straight through the gate, the garden, and the wall he had erected over the years. She had her hands clasped behind her back, as if waiting for something. Graham squinted, assessing her, lost. She shook her head serenely. "No, sir," he arched an eyebrow. "Then what do you do at my gate?" She took a small step forward, toes barely poking out from behind the bottom of the bars. Then, with a voice as clear as the sky above them, she spoke. "I came to mend your heart." Graham blinked. For an instant, he wondered if he'd misunderstood her. "You what?" "For an immigrant mama tells me broken hearts are heavy," she said, still gazing him square in the face. "I can mend them. I mended my granddaddy's." Graham blinked, not with anger, just shock. He'd had no real conversation with anyone in the flesh for months. No, not even a child's voice close up for years. The way she stood there, so sure, so fearless, it pulled on something far, far down, something long forgotten. He gave a harsh, dry laugh, not one that springs from humor, but one that well up when incredulity bumps into something absurd. Little girl, he told her, waving a hand away. Go home. You don't have any business being here. But she did not budge. My name's Lila, she said, as if that made some difference. And I'll be here tomorrow too, in case you think better of it. Then she whirled on her heel and skipped off down the sidewalk, the soles of her outsized sandals slapping with each step. A purple ribbon from her braid came undone and danced in the wind behind her. Graham sat motionless for a long time. He reassured himself it was nothing. Just some curious kid with an overactive imagination. Perhaps she lived nearby. Perhaps her grandmother sent her out to play while she cooked dinner. Perhaps she had no idea who he was. But somehow, that explanation didn't ring true to him. The following day, around noon, Graham caught himself staring out the garden window. He hadn't meant to. He reassured himself it was coincidence. He was just passing by. He was just glancing out the window, and she was there again. Same dress, same ribbons, tied slightly neater today, same sandals, same eyes. She didn't say anything this time. She simply stood there, hands behind her back, observing him. Graham glared behind the curtain. After a second, he surrendered, shuffled down the stone stairs to the garden path, and walked towards the gate. He stopped a few feet from it. You're back, he said, attempting not to sound too inquisitive. I told you I would be, replied Lila plainly. He faltered. Don't you have school? It's spring break. Does your mother know you're here? She works. Grandmama's taking care of me. He looked at her face. No fear mark, no fidgeting. She wasn't playing a trick, and she wasn't demanding anything. Not food, not money, not favors. Why me? He finally said. Lila shrugged, as if it was self-evident. Because you seemed like your heart was breaking. He felt something contract in his chest. Something old, something he thought had long withered up and evaporated. I don't need fixing, he said, more protectively than he intended. She smiled gently. That's what Granddaddy said too. He attempted to laugh again, but it was a failure. It was half, laugh, half, sigh. It was half, laugh, half, sigh. How do you fix a child someone's heart? Exactly. I listen, she replied, her eyes never leaving his. I sit with them. I tell them they're not invisible. Graham's lips parted, but no word emerged. Not at first. Nobody had ever used a word such as invisible in his presence before. And for some reason, it stung worse than he anticipated. He tried to clear his throat. You're an odd child. She smiled. Grandmama says so too. He came close to smiling, but caught himself. You'd best get home before people worry, he said instead. I will, she nodded, still bright. See you tomorrow. And off she went once more. Same skip, same slap of sandals, same flapping ribbon streaming behind her. This time, Graham did not sit back on the bench. He stood there for a long time, looking through the iron bars, watching the sidewalk way after she had vanished. Stunned, he wondered if he'd misunderstood her. You what? Something moved inside him. A flicker, small and strange. And for the first time in a very long time, the garden did not seem so quiet. True to her word, Lila came back the next day, and the day after that. And the day after that. She was like clockwork. Every afternoon at 3, she'd turn up at the gate of the Willow Hill mansion, sometimes with a sketch in her hand, sometimes with a flower behind her ear, sometimes simply humming to herself. Her sandals still slapped with each step, her plaits bounced with each skip, and her ribbon, always purple, was never quite properly fastened. She never rang the bell, never called out. She just stood at the gate, quiet and patient, as if she had every right to be there, as if she knew he would arrive. Graham attempted to dismiss her at first. He assured himself that it was a phase. She would tire of it eventually. Children always did, but the visits continued. Indeed, her visits began to insinuate themselves into his, routine like ivy, gratefully encroaching on his every day. He'd catch himself looking at the clock at 2:50, then again at 2:55. He began to take his tea to the garden just before she came, making it look as though it were an accident. Occasionally, he even dressed in a real coat, combed his hair, trimmed his beard. And within a short time, something even more peculiar did occur. He began waiting for her. That became the understanding in his mind on the 7th day. He was by the roses, not reading, not thinking, just listening. The air hung quiet. The birds were singing softly in the distance. And when he heard the soft thump-thump of her sandals hitting the sidewalk outside the gate, something in him relaxed. Like a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, she waved that day. He nodded stiffly back. When she just stood there for a while, staring at a squirrel jumping along the fence, Graham spoke up. Why do you keep coming back? He asked, his tone rough but genuine. She turned to him slowly, as if she'd been waiting for the question. Because you looked lonely. He blinked. That's not your concern, is it? Lila shrugged, unmoving. Broken hearts don't repair themselves. He laughed, but not nastily, rather as a reflex. And you're going to repair mine. She cocked her head. You don't think I can. Graham wavered, torn between irritation and something he could not define. I've had more than you could ever begin to comprehend, he stated. I don't have to comprehend everything, she said quietly. I just need to hear it. That answer shut him up, because the truth was, no one had been listening to Graham for a really long time. Oh, people used to hear him. Boardroom partners, financial analysts, stock reporters. But they didn't listen. Not really. Not the way Lila meant it. She wasn't trying to change his business or seek his opinion or switch subjects. She simply stood there, silent and unwavering, as if she had no other place she needed to be. Graham swallowed and looked away. You should be playing with kids your own age, not chatting with some old man with a past full of regret. I play, she said quietly, but sometimes people need to talk to someone. My granddaddy didn't think he did either, until he did. He looked over, furrowing his brows. What happened to him? He quit talking when my daddy died. Just sat on the porch. Wouldn't go fishing. Wouldn't sing at church. Wouldn't even smile when I made funny faces. She breathed. So I began sitting with him every day. Didn't say much, just sat. He began telling stories eventually. Little ones first, then the big ones. Graham stared at her, bewildered, and that cured his heart. She nodded, voice gentle. It helped him handle it more easily. Those words hung between them, simple but weighty, like a seed waiting to be sown. Graham didn't know what possessed him, but before he could catch himself doing it, he said, "Do you want to hear one of my tales?" Her face brightened like the sun pushing through clouds. Always. So he spoke. Initially, it arrived in pieces. He explained to her the first time he saw his wife, Amelia, how she stumbled over her own feet when hurrying to board a train and he caught her elbow just in time. He explained how she laughed unlike anyone else, how her eyes lit up when she discussed books, how she could quiet a room simply by walking into it. He spoke to her of their son, Nathan, of how proud he'd been that Nathan had been accepted into college, of how they'd gone on summer fishing trips, of how fatherhood had mellowed him in ways he never anticipated. And then, heavy as a cloud passing over the sun, he spoke of how quickly things shifted, how the disease crept up and stole his wife gradually, how he'd worked himself to death trying not to feel it, how he and Nathan had grown apart, fighting over everything and nothing, how rude words are spoken that can never be unsaid. I don't even know where he lives anymore, Graham confided one day, his tone softer than normal. It's been nearly 10 years. Leela didn't interrupt. She didn't give advice. She didn't give advice. She just listened, nodding sometimes, clasping her hands sometimes, always regarding him with the sense that his words were important. And the more he spoke, the lighter he became. Not healed, not whole, but unburdened, as if her tiny space created space for something he hadn't been brave enough to hope for, healing. One afternoon, when he stopped between stories, Leela said something. No, some people believe hearts break like glass, she said, but I believe they bend first. They stretch and bend, and then one day, if nobody's around, Snape. Graham stared at her in shock. You say a lot of wise things for somebody who still believes in skipping. She laughed. Skipping is helpful too. They exchanged a small laugh, his rusty, hers clear, and for an instant the garden was altered, not trimmed hedges and pricey roses anymore. It was lived in. Something actual had bloomed. Eventually, Graham found himself anticipating her visits like a man anticipating dawn. He didn't mind if it didn't make sense. He didn't care about the neighbors. Something was changing within him. A portion of him he had believed had long been iced over was starting to melt. Weeks went like petal falling from a flower, gentle, quiet, all but unheeded. And with each day that passed and came, Leela was incorporated into Graham's afternoons like sunlight is incorporated into a window pane. She was no longer merely a visitor to his gate. She was rhythm, she was presence, she was something that occupied the vacant spaces between the hours. She never entered, she never passed the iron fence, but for some reason that gate no longer felt like a wall. It felt more like a bridge, small, humble, but solid. Graham started to prepare for her, not out of obligation, but out of something much softer, care. He'd bring her a glass of lemonade when it was hot outside. Sometimes he'd even add a sprig of mint. When she said she loved chocolate chip cookies, he requested his housekeeper bake a fresh batch. The following day, he handed her 2 freshly baked ones wrapped in a napkin. Her face illuminated as she accepted them gingerly, as if they were gold. Thank you, mister. Graham, she breathed, as if something holy had happened. And she made gifts of herself, too. Wildflowers plucked from where her small hands could stretch. Some were bent, some lacked petals, but she'd present them to him like offerings: daisies, violets, clovers. Once, even a puff of dandelion. "This one's for wishes," she had said, smiling. "Even old hearts deserve one." One day she had brought him a picture, a crayon drawing of his garden, with him sitting on the bench and her on the other side of the gate. She'd painted the sky blue and his eyes nice. He didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded and said it was perfect. And gradually something shifted. He started sleeping at night, no more flipping, no more waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning and sitting there in quiet, tormented by the sound of recollections he couldn't help but hear. He stopped yelling at his staff, even started talking to his driver, Tony, asked him about his children, his dog, his new fishing pole. Tony almost dropped his keys the first time it occurred. And then, one afternoon, Graham did something he hadn't done in nearly a decade. He pulled out a sheet of paper and wrote a letter to his son. It wasn't long, just a page, but it contained something precious and not often achieved: honesty. He wrote of Amelia, of how much he missed her, of how much he regretted the things he'd said, the years lost, for not reaching out earlier. He didn't ask for anything. He just wanted Nathan to know his father was still around. When he was done, he put the letter in an envelope, stuck it in the mail, and signed his son's name on the outside, but he didn't mail it. He left it on the mantel, not quite sure if it was courage or timing that he was missing. And then, poof, Lila stopped showing up. He waited for her one day, but then he waited a little longer. He paced back and forth between the bench and the gate. The following day, he carried the lemonade out as well. It remained untouched. By the third day, Graham was no longer walking back and forth in the garden. He was standing at the front window, staring out like a man peering over the horizon for a ship long past due. Any sound outside caused him to look up. Any shadow caused his heart to skip. "Where are you?" he breathed once, more to himself than anyone else. He even strolled the sidewalk in front of his mansion for the first time in years. He searched for her ribbon, her jumping sandals, her voice. Nothing. By the fourth day, the silence was intolerable. That afternoon, Graham did something he hadn't done in more than a decade. He went out of the house without aim. He strolled down to the gate and pushed it open slowly. The squeak of the hinges jarred him. It seemed like change. It seemed like change. He walked out and glanced both ways down the street, hoping to catch a glimpse of braids or color, but the block was deserted. Then, when he turned to go back inside, he noticed something lying on the grass beside the gate, a little cluster of wildflowers. Hand-plucked, mismatched, bound with a ball of yarn, and underneath them, folded up neatly, was a sheet of paper. He knelt down slowly, knees creaking in protest, and carefully picked it up with shaking fingers. The writing was small but familiar, slightly uneven but full of love. "Dear Mr. Graham, I can't come anymore. Grandmama got very sick, and now we're going to live with cousins far away. I didn't want to go without saying goodbye, but Grandmama said not to knock because you need your rest. So I left this here. Your heart is lighter now. I can tell. Please don't leave. Love, Leela." Graham read it once, then again, and a third time, slowly. His throat constricted, the sunlight too harsh, the breeze too still. For a long time he stood there, the note in one hand, the flowers in the other. And the man who had laughed once when a child told him she could mend his heart stood stock still, eyes brimming, heart quaking in his chest like it had learned to feel all over again. He whispered her name once, Leela. Then he folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket as if it were made of glass. The flowers he pressed against his chest for a moment before heading back toward the house. The mansion behind him was still big, still old, still too quiet, but something had changed. The world didn't seem so far away anymore. 3 months went by, and something occurred on Willow Hill that nobody anticipated, not even the man himself, Graham Whitemore. The gates opened. For years, those high black iron gates had been closed tighter than a safe, locked, untouched, practically sacred in their quietness. Kids rode by on their bicycles and exchanged tales. Couples strolled by and crossed the street. Even deliverymen hardly approached the door. But on that Saturday, the gates were not only open, they were wide open, and through them people streamed in. It began subtly. A handful of nosy neighbors strolled in first, then a few more, and then even more and more and more. And what they discovered within that erstwhile cold mansion garden left them breathless. There were tents of white with billowing fabric, folding chairs, soft jazz spilling from hidden flower bed speakers. There were pitchers of lemonade and iced tea served at the tables. Shortbread and lemon cookies on neatly arranged plates rested next to bowls of strawberries and hand-painted signs. Children knelt among the grass, coloring stones with vivid hues, smiley faces, flowers, suns. Old people, in sun hats and linen blouses, sipped from teacups and talked softly beneath the trees. The garden, once barren of noise and cut back only by the hired help, now flowered with vitality. Bees hummed with a stately slowness from bloom to bloom. Butterflies fluttered between lavender and daisies. Laughter spilled like sunlight. At the very entrance of the garden, just beyond the gates, there stood a diminutive wooden sign. It was not professionally done. It had been obviously painted by hand, but it pranced proudly, leaning between two rose bushes that had lately been freshly cut into the form of hearts. The sign said, "Leela's Garden, for hearts that need mending." They were halted to read it. Some smiled, some glanced around wondering. Some just stood there, frozen, as if the name meant something they didn't really comprehend, but knew it was significant. And Graham, he stood close by, unspoken for the time being, observing. He wasn't dressed in his normal long woolen coat. He was in a clean blue shirt, rolled up to his elbows, with loose trousers which made the slightest sound in the wind. His hair was brushed back from his face, his chin clean, shaven. But most of all, he had an air, a sort of calm that hadn't existed for years, like something constricted finally let go within. In his fist, he clenched a white envelope, not sealed, but addressed to Nathan Whitemore, his son. He had written the letter 3 times. Not because he didn't know what to write, but because he did finally, and he wanted it written right. The first draft contained too many apologies. The second sounded too businesslike. The third, this one, was authentic, uncomplicated. Amon extending himself not as a businessman, not as a father attempting to rectify the past, but as a human being willing to reconnect. He gazed out at the garden before him and experienced a surge of feeling in his chest. He recalled the silence that had hung over this place like a weighty curtain, how he'd sit on the bench and look at nothing. How his own home had become a prison. And then he recalled the sandals, the ribbon, the girl who stood outside the fence and never once begged to come in but somehow managed to enter his life nonetheless. Lila hadn't come back. Her letter still resided in the top drawer of his desk next to the drawing she'd given him. He'd heard nothing from her family, but she remained. In every bloom, in every bird that perched on the fence post, in the way he treated people now with increased patience, greater care. She had done something no adult, no therapist, no priest, nor professional ever could. She reminded him that hearts weren't buried. And now he was prepared to do something he hadn't done in years, open his life again. The day in the community garden was his initiative. He distributed hand-written invitations to the neighbors, asked his employees to assist in setting up, called the local school and gave them space to paint the kids, invited the church choir to perform, and he did something even more intimate. He asked Tony, his chauffeur, to bring his family as well, and they came, even people who had once speculated on the lonely. Millionaire on the hill appeared, because sometimes when doors creak just a little, light filters through. As soft music filled the air and sunlight drenched the lawn, a little boy pulled at Graham's jacket. "Mister," the boy said, holding up a stone he'd painted. "This one's for your friend Lila." Graham picked up the rock carefully. It was painted with a heart, purple and yellow. In the middle, in shaky letters, the word hope. Graham's throat constricted. He cleared his throat softly and nodded. "She would have enjoyed this," he whispered, putting the stone under the sign for Lila's garden. He straightened up again, the weight of the letters still clutched in his hand. He glanced around one final time. He saw faces, smiles, life, and for the first time in 20 years, he didn't feel like a man whose past was locked away. He felt like a man who was at the start of something. Then he breathed deeply, put his hand into his pocket, and stamped the letter. Later that day, Tony would take him to the post office. He wouldn't be afraid this time, because what Lila had left him with without ever crossing the threshold beyond the gate was something that money, no matter how much, no kingdom, no investment could purchase. A second chance, a full heart, a reason to live again. And now, it was his turn to pay it forward. Sometimes life doesn't need grand gestures to begin healing, just a quiet presence, a kind word, or someone who believes in us when we've forgotten how to believe in ourselves. Graham had spent years behind walls he built to protect himself from pain. But it was the gentle persistence of a child with nothing to gain and everything to give that reminded him what it meant to feel again. We all have stories, some too heavy to say out loud, others secret even to ourselves. But in the quiet, in the little moments, we are given second chances to reach out, to forgive, to start again. And perhaps that is what is most important, not how far we've fallen, but who will sit with us until we can stand again.